Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title. Continuing my trek through Everybody Loves Raymond. We're now at the end of Season 6, and as I mentioned at the end of the last review, this is the last flashback episode. And we're going out with a bang, and I guess you could say in this case that is pun well intended, because this is about the first time that Ray and Debra made love, and it is called The First Time, episode 24 of this season. This is an episode from Tom Caltabiano and Mike Royce. Sorry if I mispronounced Tom's last name. And of course, Royce wrote Tissues, and he's also going to write The Disciplinarian, which will be a fun episode to talk about this coming season. Now, before I get too far into it, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to just do one-off support or one-off request, go the PayPal route. If you want to continuously support the channel and gain access to videos early, and also be able to suggest topics for future videos, including reviews of movies involving 3 seashells, go that route. Either way, your support is appreciated. The First Time. Now, off the top of my head, I can't remember when I first saw this one. I know it was when I first got the DVD for certain, but I don't remember if I saw it in syndication or not. I probably did, because they were showing episodes from the earlier seasons, just like a couple of them, but they were really being heavy on season 5, 6, and 7 in syndication when I started watching, which makes sense. Those are the most recent seasons. Now, watching in syndication probably be a little bit more interesting to see how they cycle through all the episodes. But that's then. Now, as it continues on from the previous 2 episodes, Marie and Debra are still. And the inciting incident of this episode is that Frank is sent across the street to return a gift to Debra that she gave them for some type of function. Frank guesses it's their 30th anniversary, and she says she just wants you to know she never liked it and never did. Which we all know Marie usually is passive-aggressive in her, "Oh, that's nice, dear," even if she doesn't like it, trying to be fake nice to your face. Well, with her being angry at Debra, and as we're going to find out at this point, it's about a month, you can definitely see she's going to drop all pretenses and be like, "Fuck you," for lack of a better term. Well, this puts Debra in a foul mood, which Ray cannot see, which is why they start reminiscing, because he's like, "Am I always that bad at seeing your signs?" Now, these signs in particular are the ready-to-launch signs, as it were, because the prologue is them talking the night before in bed, and then Ray gets her to sign this little thing saying that she will have daytime relations with him, which leads to him being a little Like, some of it is even worse. It's like, she just said that, and it's like, even if she was gonna change her mind and all that, and you got her to sign it, one, it's not enforceable in court, even though Ray does play into that a little bit, and 2, you should be able to tell from her body language that she's not in a good mood. So going around and being like, "I must tell you, I do not care." I'm surprised that's not a level moment. But Debra kind of does that metaphorically when she rips up the paper, and then Ray's like, "Oh, I'm starting to get it." Which leads into the whole conversation where Ray's like, "Was I really always this bad at reading your signs?" Which goes into the flashback, which it's always interesting to see these characters in the flashback, no matter what point in time we're flashing back to. I mean, the earliest we ever flash back to was how these 2 met. So this is in between the Season 3 and the Season 2 flashback. Which I know some people are going to go, that's a little late in the timeline to be doing this, considering that they're a couple years older than that. But they still kind of pass, and it's part of the suspension of disbelief that they're playing their characters when they were younger. And it's also how they write them and how they played that kind of show it. Like Ray being a little bit more awkward when talking to Debra, especially on the phone. Like, "Nice, I always like what you pick." Which, of course, being around the age he's supposed to be in this flashback, maybe I'm a little bit older actually now, and having been in relationships and all that, I kind of get why he's a little awkward. Because at first it is a little awkward, but it can also be a little awkward when you've been dating for a while and you're starting to catch the feels, like, strongly. Which is what this episode is going into with it, because I'll save that for the later part. Now, Ray, we see he's still a little awkward like that, which makes sense. I mean, this follows him trying to smother her with the futon, as we saw in the Season 3 flashback. And Debra, she's more or less the same. She's just a little bit less, I wouldn't want to say angry, but she's a little less jaded because she hasn't been around the Barones for all these years yet. So you still see the same characters there, but she's a little nice. Now, the way Patricia Heaton plays it, she's a little bit more demure than how we saw her in season 3, which I think is probably an acting choice, trying to compare and contrast modern with past. And it's also one of those things that memory is a fickle thing, and this is them remembering. So certain things like that we should probably take as the narrator being a little unreliable. But that's just me looking at that and spitballing like, why do they do that acting choice? And that's probably why. Now, it does work within the context of the episode. And Marie and Frank, they're more or less the same. It's just a couple years younger. And of course, like a lot of the other flashbacks, we see that Marie simply just loves Debra. Sorry. Sliding a text message over so it doesn't distract me. And they have an excellent relationship. She's always supporting her and all that. Which, based on how Marie always talks about her mother-in-law, I just wonder why the hell does Marie decide to go down that path? Now, we know the out-of-world explanation is if we didn't have that, there would be no show. At least with that aspect, we wouldn't have this 4-parter. But it's one of those things from an internal logic standpoint, why does she do that? She constantly talks about Nani Barone and being like a horrible woman. Does she really want Debra to talk about her the same way? So it's like, maybe she thinks she is being a better mother-in-law and doesn't realize that her behavior can be harmful. Or as Debra put it in that letter back in season 2, if I remember right, she could be overbearing, critical, and intrusive. So many stuff. Now, this episode, the flashback, begins with Ray, talking with Debra on the phone. Marie comes in, bringing in laundry, and her friends, and brings his friends in. Bernie's there, as is Gianni. So any indication about them first meeting Gianni in season 1 with him being the guy from the cable company, totally thrown out there. But just one of those things, like, I get it, they want to include a friend in a flashback, but it was like, that kind of creates a little for long-time viewers. But it is what it is. He's known Gianni for years now, so it's part of the lore. And they're doing the typical best friend stuff like, well, is your mother going to wash these or send him to the lab? Ribbing him about his laundry. And then, of course, they find out about the date he's going to be having the next day with Debra. Dinner and a movie and all that. And some of the stuff, they're like, ooh, candle dinner. Ooh, he's going to be having sex. Now, it's a normal conversation. Friends ribbing him a little bit, telling him the stupid stuff. Check her eggs, make sure she has enough to make breakfast for you in the morning. Which that is kind of a stupid little hint thing. I can get why some people would think it, and Ray rightfully calls it out. Like, hey, Mom's got 24 eggs up in the fridge right now. And they're like, ah. Which, of course, is as I'm recording this with the price of eggs in California, it's like, 24 eggs? Ooh. I guess they are the Rockefellers, unlike what Frank was saying. And they never comment on it, but I think Frank should still be working at this point in the series, if it's a couple years after 3, or maybe he just recently retired. They never comment on it. Well, Ray does go. He's dressed up. He's got the candle. It's not revealed until the ending of the flashback, but he is wearing cologne. He's trying to pass it off. He's subtly looking at all the clues, like looking, oh, she doesn't have any eggs, but she has that fake egg stuff. I'm not talking about the egg white stuff. I'm talking about the stuff before they start just selling egg whites. And she has 3 cartons of it. It's like, ooh. The thing where you pat her leg, like, ooh, smooth. So she shaved her legs. That was another clue. And then, of course, asking if she likes Madonna. Because according to Bernie, if they like Madonna, she's got a little bit of a wild side. And, of course, then they start kissing. And then the Barones show up. And they're not only there, they show up with Father Hubley. Now, I think you can already see, before I get into the specifics of what this is going with. Because it starts with Marie being Marie. Like, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, mister. I know what was going on here. I'd rather not know. But it's her being a little, like, sneaky sneak it is, with her wanting to hear everything, getting over by the vent and listening in. It's like, Marie, do you really have to listen to every little private conversation they have? Is it a thing? Technically, it's also going to depend on how the laws are written in New York, especially at the time. But technically, I believe that would be illegal. Because, one, they're in a private room and all that, so they have a right to privacy, and you're eavesdropping on it. And even if you're having a conversation in public, you still do have a right to privacy from eavesdropping. I know people are going to chime in and go, you do not have a right to privacy in public. Now, if you're having a private conversation, you still do have some rights to privacy. If you want to know more about it, go check out Steve Lato's page. He's an excellent lawyer page, and it's where you'll find a lot of interesting stuff about that. He did a whole video, I forget how long ago, about that, which is very interesting. And if you want to go with it as part of this, some people will probably go, well, they'll try to argue, well, then you can't be recorded in public. That's a little different. Recording a private conversation? No. Recording somebody when they're making a spectacle of themselves? Yeah. That's a little different, but I'm getting off on it. Because the whole thing is, she passed an air vent in a private dwelling and was eavesdropping. Typical Marie. And then her whole thing about this is, she's obviously trying to make sure they don't go that way. Which, of course, we all know why. It's because she doesn't want her little baby. And that's why she got Father Hubley and trying to do like a weird intervention. Because she's like, your son's moral health is in jeopardy. Moral health? Huh. Marie, I just got one big question for you in this whole situation. In this situation, are you the pot or the kettle? Because one of you is calling the other black. Now, those of you who've been watching this show along with me, or this is just a random episode you're starting to watch, and you have watched the show before, know what I'm talking about there. Because Marie is being a hypocrite with a big old capital H, whole word bold, underlined 3 times. Because what was it that we found out near the end of season 2? Oh yeah, that's right. She and Frank succumbed to temptation once, and that's how Robert was conceived. Yeah. So, she's being a big old hypocrite here because she herself had relations out of wedlock. However, I will say, had relations outside of marriage, excuse me. But that is very apt for her because from stuff I've seen and stuff I've read online, it seems that some of the biggest people that try to, when it comes to this type of thing, are self-loathers in a way because they themselves have had sexual congress outside of marriage. They ended up either marrying the person or other situations. I'll say that from the looks of things, neither of my grandmothers or any of those people. And if my abuela was one, it was long before I was born, then she made peace with it and never brought it up. But with this, it seems like she's being a whole do as I say, not as I do type thing. Because even though she did it herself, she doesn't want them to do it. Which at this point, it's like, Marie, it's none of your business. Ray is a grown-ass man. He can make his own decisions. Even though he's living with you, he can make his own decisions. You have no say, especially if he's doing it outside the confines of your house. So, I know it's played for humor, but this is one of those things where it's like, Marie, take your big nose and shove it up your ass and get the hell out of there. This is between them. And I'm going to bring this up in a second, because they do have a whole conversation, especially once Father Hubley finds out why he's been brought there. Which the funny thing is, she was brought there under false pretenses, which, keep that in mind when we get back to the flash forward, back to the present time, and we have the last conversation between Debra and Marie for this season. Now, they go on a whole back and forth. Now, Hubley was brought there under false pretenses because of the lasagna, which, we got some good one-liners from Frank about that. And then, of course, involving food, there's one line where I just want to strangle Marie a little bit because of what she says. Oh, we got Chinese coming. Oh, that's not food. Oh, yes, it is, Marie. Little subtle racism there from Marie, maybe. I know she's just trying to trash talk, saying that it's not real food like hers, but it's still one of those things like, huh? How does it make any logical sense, Marie? Now, they eventually do all leave. Then Debra and Marie have a little heart-to-heart out in the hallway, where Marie is like, it's not that I don't like you, it's just I see the way that Ray looks at you, and he's never looked at that way or felt this way about anyone ever. I mean, the closest we've seen to him having any type of big relationship like that would be the first person he slept with, which they don't come out right and say that, but they hint enough at it, too. That's where you get it, that we found out in season 1. And, of course, Karen, I believe her name was, from the tape one, but that one was more the fact that she never gave a reason why and decided to be like, we're breaking up, bye. Whereas here, with Debra, with how nervous we see, he is catching the feels. And it seems like none of his behavior or anything has told Debra that's the case. Which I can definitely speak of from past recent relationships. That is the case. Sometimes it is hard for the other person to tell, and then sometimes you tell them outright and it works. Sometimes you tell them outright when it's over, just so you know, I don't expect it back, but just so you know. And then things go from there. And of course, in this case, things do go from there, because that seems to be the catalyst for them sleeping together. And then once we flash forward, Debra, after realizing this, is like, you know what, this whole thing is stupid. So she goes back across the street and tries to have a heart-to-heart with Marie. Now, in this case, she does slip because of her wording choice, which Marie does catch. And she's like, what do you mean try to stop? And she really starts to get on. So you two had relations that night? You lied to me in front of a priest. Thing one. Marie, you brought the priest there under false pretenses, so you yourself lied to the priest. You said that you were just there for the lasagna. You never said anything about a moral intervention due to potential premarital relations. And then being like, you're blaming me for your premarital sex. Does it really sound like a blame there, Marie? She's just mentioning that the main reason that it happened was because you mentioned how much Ray felt about her. It's not a blaming, it's just explaining. But of course, Marie being Marie, picking the words and choosing the interpretation she wants. And with this, it's like, Marie, you're really starting to show how much of a hypocrite you are in this whole situation. Your holier-than-thou attitude. Rules for thee, not for me, to bring in a recent phrase. And then her being a big old stubborn bull and walking away when the other two don't want to talk with her in the room. And that, of course, leads to Debra storming out, and Marie storms out. And this whole situation is still going and going. And, of course, this being the last episode of Season 6, we're ending on a big cliffhanger. So far on the show, we really haven't ended on a big cliffhanger, just small ones. Because let's see, Season 1 didn't really end with a cliffhanger. Season 2 didn't really end with any type of cliffhanger thing. Season 3, not really. Season 4 kind of ended with a little bit of one, because Robert picking up Joanne's numbers, like, uh-oh. And then Season 5, it didn't really end. It kind of like how the first couple did. And then now this one, we end on this big cliffhanger. It's like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. Because now we're going into Season 6 without them talking to one another. And I don't think I mentioned it at all on any of these ones. I might have mentioned it in the first episode one, but in January of 2001, CBS signed the show for an additional 2 years, so that would have been Season 6 and Season 7. And Rosenthal explained that he and Ray planned for the 7th season to be the show's last. As he put it, I never saw a show getting better after 7 years. Which, when you look at stuff, is kind of true. I mean, sometimes it could carry on. I mean, like Law and Order and all that, but like I mentioned, I think the last time I brought this up, there are like different indications with that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Indication, probably the wrong word there. Examples of that. Star Trek, they always seem to go to 7 and then end, but that's just a conscious choice. Now, since we're about to go into Season 7 with the next one, as we get on, I think actually this is starting to feel familiar. I probably did go over this, so sorry if I'm retreading a little bit here. I'm recording those parts like days apart, and I didn't make notes on what I did talk about. Now, going on with that, I'm going to be making notes of how the show seemed to be going towards a wrap-up. And then, while I'm doing the research just for Season 7 in general, bringing up like when they decided to go for more seasons. Because I know, since I was watching First Run for a fact with the last season, that it was Peter Boyle's health and him wanting a vacation, which was part of the reason why they negotiated that season to be fewer episodes than the previous ones. Because the previous ones were always at around 22 to 25, whereas the last season is like, I think, 16 episodes, which is a little short, especially for a sitcom, unless it's canceled just randomly, but that was part of the negotiation. And by the time we get to season 8 and 9, you kind of wish they did. I mean, I kind of wish at points of season 8 was a little shorter, but that's one of those things that, not to say the episodes in those seasons are bad, it's just, other than a handful, I don't really remember a lot of them. The season 8 ones are mainly the ones I watched first rung, or ones that stood out to me when I watched the DVD. And 9 are mainly just a handful, like the first 2, one involving Frank's foot, and then of course the finale. I remember concepts from the other ones more than the episodes themselves, so those will be interesting, because a couple of them I think might be first time either I'm watching them in general or first time I'm watching them in a long time. But anyway, getting back on track here. Not really much else to talk about this episode. Acting is done pretty well, the writing as well, even though it does make me royally hate Marie because of her hypocrisy. Robert and Frank don't really have a lot to do outside of how they're involved in the plot. I mean, Robert's mainly just there just to tease Ray a little bit and then some other background stuff. Frank is mainly just there for some one-liners, like his little dig at Father Hubley. So it's mainly Ray, Debra, and Marie that are driving the plot. And Father Hubley does a pretty good job in the scenes he's in. The character, and, you know, Charles always is great to see in this show. I'll have to look it up just to double check because I didn't put it in notes. But I think this might be his last appearance as Father Hubley in the show. So a little shame to see him go. And I believe around this same time was when he was filming or had just come out with that short-lived show, which I really hate that it did not last more than one season. It really could have had some potential. Or his first Monday, I believe it was. It was the show about the Supreme Court and how they make decisions when they see cases. It was an interesting show, and it's how I introduced to a couple of different actors. Now, of course, that one, if I could ever find the episodes, I might just do a series review of that down the line. So I'm going to save my thoughts on that one and its makeup for then. Now we go on to season 7. So we got 3 seasons left. So from when this episode goes live, unless there's weeks like these last 2 where I do 2 a week, this series of reviews will probably last another year or so, give or take. Because it seems like I manage to get through about 2.5 seasons a year when I do it like 1 a week. It varies, of course. And there's also been weeks where I haven't done any because of timing and all that. But when I do weeks like that, it kind of makes up for it. And then when you think about the weeks where I used to do 2 at the beginning, where I had the time to sit down and do it, it always balances out somewhere. And of course, April is when the 3rd year anniversary pops up, so that should be interesting. Depending on what one I got live that week, I might actually decide to give you a double dose or a triple dose, depending. But going forward, just a little thing, I am going to try to sit down and get these ones recorded out in sequence, just so in case there's a week where I don't feel like doing anything or can't, I have stuff in the can. So my plan, just giving you a heads up for these, is that when it's a weekend day, or if I have time on days that I work, it is to watch 1 disc worth of stuff, do my notes, put down any interesting trivia, and then as time allows, record them, have them in the can, and then go through it by disc, and then once I got everything like that, if there's like any other stuff I want to record, do it. So kind of like and then let them go live. Kind of like how my idea was originally for when I reviewed Season 1 of Game of Thrones, was to have most of it in the can. That one kind of fell apart at the end, though. Although I kind of am wishing now that I had waited until I had at least 6 or 7 of the episodes recorded before I started uploading them, so that as they were in the can, I could just go for it. But it is what it is on that. Season 2, I'll probably rectify that. Now, first episode of Season 7 is going to be the episode where all this comes to a head. And that, of course, is going to be The Cult, written by Tucker Colley. But that, everybody, will be next time. Till then.